a familiar story. Sometimes familiar stories, we kind of get lost and drift off. Yeah, our minds kind of wander when even Zacchaeus is mentioned. I start picturing this thing in my Sunday school class when I was a junior in Sunday school, and it was the teacher only brought it in for the month, whatever the month was, that was going to have the story of Zacchaeus in it. She used it for other things too. And it actually looked like a tree trunk that ran from the floor to the ceiling. And it just kind of ended up there. It didn't have any branches or anything. And of course, we were supposed to pretend about the branches and all of it. So we get kind of lost in our memories of those familiar stories that we've heard since a child. But while we're reading the scripture today, I want you to watch for three things. For hospitality, for joy, and for salvation. Because those are the three components in the story that kind of change it from the little child story in Sunday school to how we can apply it when we go out the door today.
All right.
So Luke 19. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried. And was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defaulted anyone for anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost.
Amen.
The Lord bless the reading of this word and teaching to us today. Now the theme is, today salvation has come to this house. Let's change that from the perspective of standing at the door of Zacchaeus' house in a very obscure place in the world in the middle of the little river valley where he lived, to this house. Would it be strange to say that today salvation has come to Dover Place Christian Church? Would that be a strange concept? No, because we are here that we might hear that we have been given grace and mercy again and again and again. This is why this place stands here, and we come together to hear the gospel, just like Zacchaeus heard it on this day. So we need to see if we can translate what happened with this man to what happens as we climb that tree. Look down to see what we can see. Maybe we are a little blinded by our height Or maybe we are truly blinded by many other things as well. So the setting of the story is, it's sandwiched between some stories in the previous chapter. One in particular is about a rich man. And he said, "What do I need to do to become part of your kingdom of heaven thing that you're talking about?" And Jesus said to him, "Well, you need to follow the commandments." He said, "Oh, I got that. I've been doing that ever since I was a little kid." Then Jesus said, "Good. Go and sell everything you have and give it to the poor." The man immediately became so sad that he couldn't function, probably just went away in disgust. Is that because the answer to his question wasn't the answer he was expecting? I think that has a little bit to do with the story in this text we had today, don't you? Do you think Zacchaeus was actually expecting to have to take someone to his home, give them a meal, and probably not? Unexpected. And then the next chapter, there's another story that's very unexpected, where a man becomes a ruler. He just kind of worked his way up through the ranks, and he gives 10 of his servants charge over his funds while he is gone on a journey, some pilgrimage. And he expects them to do something with them, but surprise, surprise, surprise. Some of them lost it. Some of them couldn't keep track. A couple of people didn't do so good. There was just one, right, who had actually done anything with the money that had been given in their charge. Unexpected things happen in our lives. Luke is telling us that. What are you going to do about that, Luke says? Are you going to take the examples of the teacher, who he calls the Christ, the shepherd, or are we going to just blindly wander? What are we going to do with it? You know, Luke is a master of storytelling, because here he's comparing Zacchaeus to that rich man in the previous part of his stories. The rich man received so many blessings all through his life, and his response was to hoard it all. Keep it. Zacchaeus received so much wealth too. In fact, they even called him a rich man. Then Jesus reminded Zacchaeus of what his real blessing was. His real blessing was not the opulence of wealth, but the identity of being a son of Abraham. He was a person who needed to know his heritage. He needed to realize and live out his heritage as a person of faith, who could say, I will give back what I have taken wrongly. I will give half of what I have to the poor because I have seen what I should do. He was like the blind man in the previous stories. He couldn't see because he was short. He was seeking to see Jesus by climbing somewhere where he could see. But just seeing Jesus wasn't enough. The lesson of the story is that he got new eyes to see what he had never been able to see before. And that's his greed. That's what the rich man in the previous story couldn't get. And what the servants in the next text couldn't get. You know, it's amazing to me that sometimes Zacchaeus not being able to see is passed over because it's our condition. Isn't it true that it's hard to see your own stuff? Hard to see your own happenings, right? Whatever you've done in the past, your mistakes. Hard to see them even turning around and looking sometimes. It's easier to see someone else's. But the metaphor from Zacchaeus is that he's just like the blind man. The metaphor is that he was suffering from something. What was he suffering from? He was suffering from loneliness, isolation. Just like the blind man, he couldn't be a part of the community. Not because he couldn't do it, but because the community wouldn't let him. They saw his faults. They saw he was a sinner. They both needed healing. The man who was really blind and Zacchaeus who was blinded by his wealth. They had a sickness that needed to be healed. I'm not talking about disease. The sickness was that they were seeking to be in and part of the community that they could not be a part of. They were grieving not being with others. Both met Jesus and both were healed and both were made a part of the community again. It was maybe even easier for the blind man to become a part of the community than it was Zacchaeus because he had a reputation to overcome. But both of them came into communion because of their interaction in these ways that they came to see Jesus. This is the good news. All we like sheep are I can't say it. We are set in our thinking and in our ways to be like sheep. We are what we are. Isaiah 53 says, and all of that was laid on him. From Isaiah's perspective, that was the one who was going to suffer for us. From our perspective, looking back through history, we think of Jesus immediately. We, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every man or woman to their own way. And the Lord has laid that heavy burden on that one who will suffer. The story of Zacchaeus reminds us that Jesus' good news is that God continues to seek us because we don't know where we are or whose we are most of the time. God continually is reminding and seeking those who are lost. That's what it says at the end of our scripture. For the one who was sent to suffer is also the one who came to seek out and to save. Like the rich man, we can be so comfortable that we are blind to the discomfort of others. Like the blind one, we can be so uncomfortable that we seek comfort at any cost. Remember what the blind man was doing? Was screaming out, flailing his arms, making a spectacle of himself. Like Zacchaeus, we are willing to do anything to be a part of what is going on, even if it means climbing a tree. Sometimes we're that one who's seeking to know what is the help that we need. And like Jesus, we have something to offer. We have the gospel to offer. The part that bubbles up and comes out of us once we have communed with each other and heard the gospel story again, that we like sheep have gone astray, but we are sought after and brought back. That's the gospel that we're going to hear over and over and over again as Advent marches toward us, right? Emmanuel, God with us. God cares. What are you going to do about it, right? That's the message of the gospel at Christmas. Like Jesus, these are the things that we can offer. We can remind people of their blessings and the opportunity to give from abundance. And always remember that when you're telling someone something else, there are four fingers pointing back at you, right?
Right.
We can heal and comfort the blind who only want someone to turn and recognize their situation. Isn't that what the blind man was doing, screaming and yelling and carrying on? We can bring those who are so far away back to their identity as a child of God. I meet people sometimes who I question that. It's hard to imagine. People who hurt themselves and who hurt others. It's hard to imagine they're a child of God. But we are sent to the most unimaginable place, to the most unlikely person. And so Jesus is the center of the story about a short man who could not see because he wasn't tall enough. He had lost his identity and became greedy. He let power blind him to his own wrongdoing. He had become a taker and not a giver. Why did Jesus need to go to Zacchaeus' house? It was for Zacchaeus. It was for him. It was for an opportunity so that he could show hospitality, so that he could be reminded of his wealth and maybe even shamed because of it in some ways. So that Zacchaeus could be reminded of his spiritual roots. And maybe to tell Zacchaeus where Jesus was headed and why. Jesus came through Jericho out of the deep valley of the Jordan River, always going uphill, according to our stories, always going toward what place? Jerusalem. Jerusalem sits on the highest place in the whole area. And here Jesus is, telling his disciples over and over again, I have to go to Jerusalem. I'm headed to Jerusalem. I don't care what happens in the meantime. I'm going to Jerusalem because that is where I will live out my call. And the disciples said, no, don't do that. He's already, according to Luke, he's already given them 3 lectures on this one subject. And they're still saying, no. Why did Jesus do this? Because he wanted to heal him of his blindness. Let's see if you can tell me some things. What did Jesus see in Zacchaeus, you think? Anybody? Just greed. What else?
A lot of shortcomings.
Shortcomings. Materialism. Yeah.
And the desire to change.
Desire to change. Right. What else? Were there any possibilities in the Zacchaeus?
He was there.
He was there. He was ready. Jesus knew that he was clay. Right? He could be molded if he was just reminded who he was. So Jesus declared to the whole crowd, this is the son of Abraham, and he can do things, and he can be someone, and he can change your lives by giving you some things that you cannot afford, but he can also be a spiritual leader. He was available. He just didn't know it. What did Zacchaeus see in Jesus then?
Salvation.
Salvation. How about it first? He just climbed a tree to find out, what's this guy doing, right? Who is he? He saw mystery, excitement. I wonder if sometimes we don't forget to see that in the things that God gives us, things that God leads us to. I have a strange question. This is the question that came to my mind. What does Jesus see in me? And then I changed the question just a little bit because that was too hard. I thought, what does the gospel reveal about my life? Zacchaeus was wanting to know that. What is Jesus going to tell me about myself? Here's the other question I thought of. What do I see in the gospel of Jesus? What do I see in that gospel? Here's a way to translate that. What do I see in the good news telling of God's very presence? What do I see in that presence that appears as that baby in the cradle, our possibilities? I came to a new understanding. I think it was while Bill was preaching a few Sundays ago. We are sent to go out to all who are not with us. We are called to remind them of their status as a child of God. We are commanded to bring them with us into God's work in the world, even if we have to carry them. We were talking about the lame who couldn't walk.
Yeah.
When John the Baptist asked if Jesus was one who was sent or would there be another, this is what Jesus said. Go and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, The dead are raised up. The poor have the gospel preached to them. Blessed is he who does not take offense to me, at me. Jesus said, these things are going on and they prove who I am, and John knows that. Can you prove your identity as a believer? Can we, all of us as a congregation, as a group who worship here together, show that for those who are not inside these walls? Luke's message from the beginning to the end is God has come to be here with us, and it is our responsibility to join in the work of God. This was not a new message to the Jews who had held on by their fingernails to the faith that had been passed on to them. There were few, very few, who knew what Jesus was saying when he first started teaching them. But it was a new vision to the people who could not see, who could not walk, who could not hear, who could not live out their heritage, and who had no community and no hope. That was the people that Isaiah was talking about. The people who walk in darkness. We're those people. We see glimmers of light, right? And that spurs us on to do something that we have never been able to do before, sometimes. Has Jesus come to visit us here today through this story? Did salvation come to this house? You'll have to answer that. Are we being reminded of our responsibility to give hospitality? Maybe. Do we need to be reminded of our identity? Maybe. If we are to be like Christ, what will that require me to do for the blind? What will I need to do for the deaf and those who can't walk and who are sick and who are poor and even the dead in spirit? What do I need to do? The disciple leadership uses many things to keep us reminded of our calling, using the phrase from our doorstep to the ends of the earth. I find myself climbing a tree and seeking to see what's happening. I need to be reminded of my identity and how I need to make things right in my life. Because what this lesson teaches me is we all, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned everyone to their own way. And the Lord has laid on the one who's willing to suffer the whole burden of that. So suffering is not now a negative thing, but it's the thing for which we seek and go and look and try to meet those great responsibilities. So that we, like sheep, just like Paul said, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, because he realized that he was blinded too. So, God bless this teaching.